some of our favorite things, because people at work know that we like to buy cars and go into dealerships and hassle with people. What are some of our favorite vehicles from the 2010s? So this is like our top 10 list, and there's no particular segment, like I mentioned at the beginning. So we have Josh and I's favorite coupes, trucks, SUVs, sedans, and then like a wild card, like any vehicle we could have picked from the 2010 decade. So I'll let you go ahead and go first, Josh. What was the first coupe that you put up on your list?
Man, I had to talk about a C6 Mercedes-Benz C63 AMG. So this is talking about, when I'm talking about this one, I know that there's the black edition from 2012 and earlier, but I'm specifically talking about the edition 507 that they came out with between 13 to 15. And so this was talking about a car that had a naturally aspirated 6.3 liter V8 from Mercedes, pushing out with the edition 507, 507 horsepower. I drove the car, absolutely fell in love with it. You can also get this car right now between 30 and 40 for a car that had a starting MSRP around 90. So it's a pretty good deal with pretty low miles. So it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, depreciated pretty quick. And I think I named it when we were driving it around town as the German Corvette, because that's what it felt like to me and sounded like. It was a nice car. But speaking of American muscle cars, the coupe that I put up there was the 2019 Mustang Bullitt. Not only is this a pretty sweet looking vehicle to me, but it has some sentimental value to me because I used to own a 2001 Bullitt. And all it really is basically 1968 was, they had a movie with Steve McQueen called Bullitt, where he was like a detective and he drove a dark Highland green Mustang 390 GT in it. And in 2001, Ford decided to make a tribute back to it. And it was really just an appearance package. It wasn't too much different from the regular GT. It was like a little bit lower, different wheels, some aesthetic things, and of course the paint color, and a little bit more horsepower. And that was the first car that I bought myself that I didn't need my parents' help with. Like, I paid for that car. So that has some sentimental value to it. They came out again in 2008 and 9 with another Mustang Bullitt. And then 2019, they brought it back again. So this vehicle is definitely one of the best looking Mustangs, I think, of the newer generation, and also happens to have some type of sentimental value to me.
Right.
So then those are our coupes, that are number 1, number 2, and none of these vehicles are in any particular order. It's just a general top 10 list. So then let's move into the trucks. What was your favorite truck of the 2010s?
Immediately, I had to talk about the F-150 SVT Raptor. So this is prior to the newer Raptors, and why that matters, I guess, is a reoccurring theme, is a naturally aspirated 6.2 liter V8. So no turbos, just straight cylinders, screaming bald eagles out the dual exhaust. This sucker was awesome. Also, got really crappy gas mileage, but that's not what we're worried about. We're talking about cars we thought were cool. And so I guess if you're buying a truck, you weren't necessarily as worried about getting gas mileage, but this car or this truck also came in some pretty cool colors. So I thought it was an awesome car out there.
Yeah, it's a pretty sweet truck for sure. And speaking of depreciating value, this truck really doesn't depreciate that quick. It holds one of the best values of any vehicle that we've seen. So it's another cool feature or factor of it. But probably the truck that I would have to go with isn't as crazy and in your face as Josh's pick. I just had the Toyota Tacoma from 2015 on. The newer body style was one of my favorites. And when I was looking for a truck, I was looking for this as well. It was a little bit out of my price range at the time, but overall, it's a really good truck. Speaking of holding value, Toyotas in general, and especially Tacomas, hold value very well. So if you own it for a couple years and you're trying to trade it in later, you're probably going to have a nice number under that trade-in box with the dealership. But overall, pretty good sized truck. Gets pretty decent gas mileage for a truck because it's a little bit smaller, mid-sized truck. Comes in a straight 4-cylinder or in a V6. If you're trying to tow something, nothing like too crazy, if you're towing, like, I think I've seen people tow cars with it before, but if you're towing something like 4-wheelers, jet skis, something like that, like, easily handles it. But if you're trying to tow something massive, then you're going to need a little bit bigger truck. But overall, it does the truck stuff you want it to do. And it comes in so many different trims, from TRD off-road, or even there's a TRD Pro, which is a really nice trim. It has all kinds of different stuff for any truck people, really.
Yeah, I love this Tacoma.
Yeah, they look good. I have there's plenty of people in the neighborhood that have some, and they have, like you said, with the Raptor, the Tacoma also has a lot of cool colors as well too. And I'm a color person, but speaking of sweet colors, your pick for sedan is the Volkswagen Arteon. So why don't you go a little bit deeper into that for us?
Well, I've always been somewhat of a Volkswagen nut. I'm on my second Volkswagen right now, but when I heard about the Arteon coming out, this is a pretty cool car. You can have the luxury of driving a four-door sedan that has the abilities like a hatchback. So you have that nice hatched trunk style. But they did come out with a pretty crazy color and this yellowy color. I'm not a huge fan. I do think it's pretty cool. If you're looking to stand out, I think it's awesome. But outside of that, I think it's an awesome step for Volkswagen and the way they took that. It is a little more expensive for Volkswagen, but I do think if you're in the market to buy a nicer or lower end, nicer Audi, or even a BMW or Mercedes, the Arteon is definitely an option for you because it offers massaging seats. It offers the whole 9 yards. Go look into those trims and see what it offers. It's up there.
Yeah, pretty nice vehicle for sure. But speaking of luxury sedans, my pick was the Acura TLX A-Spec. What makes this one different? Yeah, I see the look you're making. This is a slick-looking sedan, and with the A-Spec edition, it's an appearance package as well as a little bit of a performance package. So you have the look of a sporty vehicle and you have the performance of a sporty vehicle. Nothing too crazy, but it has some pick up and go to it. One of the things I do critique about it is if I was to buy one, I would get one without the red interior. The black interior is a little bit more rare, but they make the red. That's like, for the most part, what most of them come with. I'm just not a red interior person. It looks pretty sweet, but I would prefer the black for sure.
Yeah.
So after that, speaking of A-Spec vehicles, for your sedan, tell us what you pick, or for your SUV, excuse me, what did you pick for that one, Josh?
I picked the Acura RDX A-Spec. So this talks about the RDX redesign that came out in 2018 or 2019, around that time period. They redesigned it from the older style. So it went away from looking like a Honda CRV and now more into looking like its own. And so what's also pretty cool about this RDX A-Spec, I'll go into it really shortly, is Acura had announced that the infotainment setup, going from the infotainment down to the gear lever, is the same style that they use in their supercar, the Acura NSX. So it is somewhat of a pushing forward for Acura. So if you like that kind of stuff, that's their newest infotainment. So it's really nice, looks good, as well as similar to the TLX. Great appearance package. The exhaust tips on the back end look great. The blue color that it can come in is also beautiful. This car stands out. It's just a great looking car and also pretty powerful for what it is.
Yeah, it's a pretty slick looking vehicle. We keep saying that, but the A-Specs, all of them, all the models look pretty good. Mine wasn't as cool as Josh's in that aspect, but one that I picked was the Kia Telluride because thinking behind this SUV, it's a 3-row SUV. It has a wide range of trims between like the base and the upper one, and they're all relatively cheaper. And when I say that, like Kia's known for being a cheaper OEM, but they really didn't cheap out too much on the Telluride. Like it's really nice for the price. And being that 3-row SUVs, when you look at that, like Tahoes or Suburbans or Envision, stuff like that, they're just so much more expensive. But the Telluride and even like the Hyundai Palisade, like the brother to this one, they're really not that expensive for the size of the vehicle that you're getting. So
now, if you want to get a fully loaded one, you're pushing mid-40s.
Yeah.
For the Telluride compared to, I'm thinking about getting a Suburban or even a Tahoe or Yukon, you name it.
For like 70.
You're spending a 60 to 90 based on what you're getting. So I think best bang for your buck, you also get a 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty with the Kia Telluride or a Hyundai Palisade. So there's that. So get your kids, all 8 of your kids inside those cars the same way and get the best bang for your buck.
Yeah, and there's not very many 3-row SUVs that I think look stunning, and I think Kia hit the nail on the head with this one. So it looks pretty good. So our last two for number 9 and number 10, we kind of had like a wild card pick. It's just like any vehicle you wanted to pick out of there. Well, what was yours, Josh?
Man, I had to pick the Lexus LC 500, and they also made a hybrid version, not as cool, but the LC 500, going back to our reoccurring theme, comes with a naturally aspirated V8. And so, coming from such a brand as Lexus to put into a grand touring car, so not a supercar and not a regular coupe, just a grand touring, so it's just a beautiful car to cruise around in, pushing upper of 400 horsepower, almost 500 horsepower, and a car that is just beautiful in style. Every inch of that car was created with detail. For more reference, go ahead and go watch Doug DeMuro's coverage of the LC 500. Covers it in depth of all of its features and stuff. I think he gives it a lot of credit. Like he does a good job covering that video for it.
Yeah, and it's almost futuristic kind of concept car looking to me. Like it's so much of a different styling than any other car.
Right.
But to take your theme of naturally aspirated V8s and to one-up it, what I picked was the 2012 through 2017 Dodge Viper, which is a naturally aspirated V10, 8.4 liters of American horsepower, just ridiculous. I've always been a fan of the Viper, but this newest generation, kind of sad to see it leave in 2017, but it's one of the slickest ones. To me,
right.
There's not very many American cars that make something larger than a V8, and this is back in the 90s, America's take, or Dodge's take, at the European sports cars and supercars with the original Viper. So to see them carry that through 20, 30 years and to end up with this one, I think is a pretty good end result.
Agreed.
We'll see if they bring it back, But speaking of vehicles that have just ridiculous engines, V10s, V12s, something that we mentioned at the beginning is Josh and I like to watch all these auto auctions and see what people are buying and what people are selling and just keep things interesting. What we have is the top 10 most expensive cars sold at auction in 2019, for courtesy of CarBuzz is where we got this from. But the first one to start right off the bat is the 2002 Ferrari F2002 race car. And we'll pull up pictures for all of these so you can see them. But basically, this is an Indy car, Formula One car. I don't know too much about the difference, so don't yell at me if I called it the wrong thing. I am trying to learn more about the auto racing. But it is a Ferrari race car that they used in the early 2000s. I think this one I was reading about it, they actually didn't race it too much or at all. They had went back to the F2001 because that one was a tested trial race car, and so they just kind of sold this one into auction, and it had raised a little bit over $6.6 million for this race car.
Yeah, pretty crazy. I mean, if you're out there, if you have the money to collect cars like that, go ahead.
Yeah. That's what you do, because I don't think you can drive this thing on the street probably.
No.
But as you'll probably see, common for this list is there's quite a few Ferraris on here. So at the number 9 is a 1958 Ferrari 250 GT Series 1 Cabriolet for $6.8 million.
So you see a reoccurring theme of Ferrari on this, but
yeah,
interesting to note, with this Ferrari specifically, you can see a lot of whether or not maybe Corvette came out with this look first, or if Ferrari did, based on the headlight setup and the rear end. Mm-hmm. But I do know that when the Corvette was first created back in the late 50s, it was given Ferrari and everyone a run for their money out at Le Mans. And so I do think that this, maybe I'll give America some credit. I don't know. We need to fact check that, but it is definitely interesting to look at and whether or not who came out with the design, but it's still a pretty cool car.
Yeah, I could see the relation for sure. So now to break the two Ferrari streak here, we have a 2017 Pagani Zonda Aether, which is a little bit more than $6.8 million, beating out the 250 GT. This is an Italian supercar. I've really got exposed to these first when I was playing racing games like Forza growing up in middle school and high school, and these cars have always looked just jaw-dropping to me. We see the Huayra here in the U.S., but I don't think the Zonda is street legal in the U.S., so you really won't see them driving at like Coffee and Cars or Caffeine and Octane, any of those type car shows. I'm sure somebody has one collected somewhere in the U.S., but the Zonda to me is just an awe-inspiring vehicle to just look at.
Right.
It's also a to one up the Dodge Viper. It is a 7.3 liter V12 with 750 horsepower. So also what makes it cool.
And a manual transmission.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So then going on from that one, back to Ferrari. Number 7 is a 1963 Ferrari 250 GT SWB Berlinetta at almost $7.6 million.
Right.
So
all of these Ferraris, these are all, like, if you know enough about Ferrari and Lamborghini, that whole situation, Ferrari started out as a business racing. So a lot of their cars that they have are really famous for racing. And so there's a lot of appeal to people that loved growing up watching stuff like that. So it's pretty cool to note on stuff like that. I know there's also the 250 GTO that came out with a little bit later. It's also a super cool car, but all in all, up there is millions of dollars for what they can go for.
yeah, like you said, a lot of racing inspired type vehicles. But now here we have our first American vehicle on the top 10 list, 1965 Ford GT40 Roadster prototype, which sold for $7.6 million and some change. So if y'all have seen the movie, speaking of Ferrari and racing, the recent movie Ford v Ferrari, you've seen this vehicle in that movie, and it is just a machine for just racing. Like there's nothing
to built fast.
Yeah, it's one thing was made in mind when building this car. If you saw the movie and if you know anything about the history, was to beat Ferrari, which is, as Josh said, they're known for racing, and Ford was like, we'll take a crack at it. Let's see what we got. Number 5, going back to Ferraris again, 1962 Ferrari 250 GT SWB Berlinetta. So a little bit similar as the previous vehicle, but a different year. So again, this one broke the $8 million range, almost 8.2 is like almost 8 and 150,000 million, 8 million and some change to say that correctly. But yeah, so another Ferrari coming up on number 5. The number 4, so we were mentioning earlier, Lambo versus Ferrari, the 2014 Lamborghini Veneno Roadster, which is almost $8.4 million. And funny, I'll say funny or not like funny story about this one. This vehicle was actually seized from like an African dictator's son or something like that is what I was reading. So this was the only vehicle that on this list.
Equatorial Guinea. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was the only vehicle on this list that wasn't sold from a previous owner. It was taken and then put up the auction. So this one, like we said, was a little bit over $8.3 million. So this, there's not very many of these Lamborghinis made in the world. So interesting to see it taken and then sold to somebody else, probably to another collector of some type. So number 3 gets us back to the 1958 Ferrari 250 GT LWB California Spider, which sold for $9.9 million. So a lot of late 50s and early 60s Ferraris on here. That just goes back to Josh's point earlier. A lot of that is dating back to Ferrari's like heyday of racing days. Obviously, Ferrari is still a big name in racing, but this was when Ferrari was the top dog for sure. Number 2 is the 1939, which is the oldest vehicle on this list, Alfa Romeo 8C 2900B Touring Berlinetta, which sold for a big jump. You ready for this? $18.5 million. So we went from 9.9 to almost doubling it at 18.5. This is, like we said, the oldest vehicle on this list. You can definitely see the hints of 1930s automotive styling in this vehicle. Very old school, kind of has a sleek look to it. I definitely like it. It just doesn't look like it. If I don't know much about Alfa Romeo, but just looking at the pictures, it just doesn't look like it'd be an $18.5 million vehicle. Well, so that's what kind of makes it.
Only one of 5, and it was pre-war, so pre-World War II. So these are probably built in Italy for Alfa Romeo, and so the fact that makes them probably $18.5 million is that if they're anywhere else but in Italy, it means that someone meant for it to last this long. And so if it looks like that in this picture, still to this day, it's like, man.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy. But the number one most expensive vehicle sold in 2019 was the 1994 McLaren F1 LM specification for $19.8 million. So almost $20 million. If you've played any racing game ever, you've probably seen this vehicle in it because it is basically a Formula One car for the street. And a fun fact about this vehicle is it's a two-door vehicle, but it's a three-seater. Did you see that in the pictures, Josh? It's a center
Yeah.
seating, and it has two seats right next to you. So if you're driving in the middle by yourself, it's one of the few vehicles, if not the only vehicle, I'm sure there's other ones out there, where it's a center. You know, in the US, the wheel's on the left, and then like in UK, it's on the right. This one is right in the middle. And then you have like I said, the two behind you. So it's kind of a weird thing. I don't know how many people are toting around two passengers in this thing, if people are drive this vehicle out in the street very often. But that is the most expensive vehicle that was sold in 2019.
One's your golf clubs on one side, and the other side is your briefcase, and so
Yeah.
you're ready to go.
Yeah, those are your passengers. That's it. Nobody's allowed to sit in those.